Welcome to this Decoding Digital Media webinar brought to you by MII Media Impact International in partnership with Faith Tech. I'm your host, Nachi Lazarus, and today we are talking about content. Yes, not just content creation. We are talking about content that leads to conversations. Two very important topics in digital media ministry: content and conversations. At the end of the day, why do we create content? Why do we run campaigns? Why do we use social media? Why do we do all that we do in media ministry? It is for those precious engagement that we have with our audience, right? Precious conversations. Today, we have two very experienced guests with lots of practical knowledge and wisdom. And the three of us are going to go into areas that will probably open your minds to new ways of looking at content, especially with related to conversations. All I can tell you is get ready to take a lot of notes. Let me take a minute to introduce our guest to you. Let me start with Holly Tate. Holly Tate is the Senior Vice President of Growth at Leader, a digital workspace that builds effective leaders and healthy teams. Prior to working at Leader, she spent 9 years helping organizations hire and build their best teams at Vanderbloemen, an executive search firm. In 2020, Holly left her role as Vice President of Business Development and Marketing at Vanderbloemen to launch the Ready Network LLC, which she founded to help people and organizations get ready for growth. We also have John Rawls on the show again. Some of you heard him in our earlier webinars, and John is the founder and owner of Kavana Media. He has been working with clients and college students for the last 20 years in the communication and media industry. After spending almost a decade working and living overseas, especially in Taiwan, he and his Kavana team are working with missions teams and organizations in over 100 countries around the world. I can't wait to get this conversation started with these two amazing guests. But before we do that, we do have to take care of one more item, and that is questions and answers. If you have any questions and answers, please leave them in the Q&A tab. You will see the Q&A tab and just click on that and leave your questions. And we would love to hear from you. We want to hear from you, whether it's a comment or a question or something you want to add to the conversation. Feel free to do that. If you have a question, we'll make sure we get you the answers. We have an expert standing by to answer your questions live as the webinar progresses. So make sure you use that Q&A tab fully. Now, here is my conversation with John and Holly. Holly and John, welcome to Decoding Digital Media webinar. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Holly.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
John, welcome back. You've been here before. Thank you again for being here.
It is my honor. Thanks for asking me, Nachi.
Thank you guys for taking the time. And what a great topic we have today. We're talking about content and conversation. But before we jump into the topic, I want our audience to get to know you a little bit better. So we have our routine of asking our guests to share two things. One, a personal detail that you would like our audience to know so that they get to know you a little bit better. And two, a professional detail, anything related to your ministry, your work, your professional life, whatever you like to. So I'll first go with Holly. Holly, you go first. One personal and one professional detail for our audience.
Perfect. Well, personal, I live in Houston, Texas, where we have almost melted this summer. It has been record highs of like 107, 109, and we are over it. So don't ever visit Houston in the summer. It's terrible, but come in the fall. It's wonderful. So that's where I live. And professionally, I work for a software company. They're based out of Dallas, which is also in Texas, but I get to work remotely from Houston, and we are a digital workspace. So I get to help organizations build effective leaders, healthy teams, so that they can increase results. And we work with a lot of churches and ministries with our software. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks for sharing those details with our audience. John.
Yeah, personal. We live in a town, what's called Maryville, but if locals call it Marvel, or they all sorts of variations. It's just south of Knoxville, Tennessee. And actually, our Kavanaugh Media office is at the McGee-Tyson Airport. And so you may hear Delta Airlines taking off or other. I mean, we're literally in an office space in between two hangars filled with jets and planes. And personally, I'm a pilot. So that's been really, really nice. There are days in between calls that I can go out, jump in a plane, fly around here and be back in my office within maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And so that's been tremendously fun to be able to do that. And I don't get any emails or anything when I'm up in the air. And so it's just a completely different thing from the rest of my life and work and dings and everything else that is involved with that. So yeah, I love that. 3 kids. The most of them have grown. My daughter's still in high school. My younger son has a marketing degree and works with our company. And so that's been a real blessing there, even to have family to work. Professionally, we're operating in about over 100 countries now with about 23 different mission organizations. And I think the thing I would say I'm the most excited about right now is an initiative that we've been doing that is among multiple organizations working together in countries, and we help bring these coalitions together, and there's no charge. And so even the ads, everything is being covered. So all we're asking is for people will you talk to somebody about Jesus if we find somebody interested? And it is doubling every year now, and it's really, really working well. And so, in fact, some of what I'm going to share today is a result of that. Some of the things that I'm seeing from those efforts. So, yeah. I think really, Nachi, it's a John 17 thing, which is the thing I'm most passionate about, even professionally, is that I want us to figure out how we work and play well together. And I think the Lord is pleased with that. And so when ministries don't say, well, there's only one way to do something, or this is the whatever, then I think the Lord's pleased. In that diversity of thought and efforts and stuff, God gets the glory to it. And that unity, I think, is going to be a tremendously powerful thing. And so that's on a professional side. That's what I'm most excited about, are those kind of things.
That is awesome. I'm excited to kickstart this conversation. And first, I want to start off with Holly, and I really want to explore some options around content and conversation. And what do you see as gaps in the connection between content and conversation? So lead us into some of those things. We'll start with you.
Yeah. Well, first, I think it's important for us to go, okay, why is this so hard? Like, to really understand the challenges that we're facing. And a few things that come to mind for me of why, because the content is not the problem. There is a limitless, unending amounts of content online these days. It can be overwhelming to feel like, how to even get started, and then how to know if it's successful or not. And so that's the first disconnect, I think, is that we get obsessed with metrics. And metrics are so important, especially in ministry, where we are responsible for being good stewards of the funding that we've been given. But sometimes I think that we get too obsessed with metrics that we're afraid to try new things. I think it's really important to start with one metric, but don't be afraid to change that over time. I think that is a really key thing, especially if you're watching this and you're in leadership of a ministry, to really be able to free up your team to not feel like they have to be so latched on to this one metric to win or lose on a campaign. Yes, have a goal, begin with the end in mind, but be creative. Make sure there's freedom for you to be able to start and then iterate over time as you're working on your content or your campaign. So that was the first thing. And I could talk about that for hours, but it's just to be really clear on your metrics, but don't be afraid to change it as you get things out in the world and see how humans respond to it. The next thing, and Nachi, this is one of my favorite topics, is persona. So I've seen too many ministries that are trying to be everything to everyone. And I am a really strong believer in knowing who God has called you to reach. When you're doing a piece of content or a campaign or starting a new ministry brand, really making sure that you're clear on who your persona is. And persona is just a fictional representation of your ideal. In the business world, it's ideal customer. In this case, it would be your ideal seeker or ideal person that you want to be a part of your ministry or engaging in conversation with you. And so when we start with that of who am I really trying to reach, that's when we can make sure that our content actually drives conversation. We're making it very, very specific to that type of person that we're trying to reach. So for example, if I begin knowing that I'm reaching out to women in their 20s in the Ukraine, the content I create is going to be very different than if I was trying to reach a 40, 50-year-old male in Germany, right? But I've seen too many ministries that just go really broad, and then they're frustrated with the results because they haven't started with that specific person that they're trying to reach. And then the third one, and this is really interesting, I would love to hear y'all's take on this, John and Nachi. But I think that we often spend too much time and energy on overproducing content. Now, I absolutely think that we should lead with excellence. Don't hear me say that we should be, putting not excellent things out in the world. But the content that I see really driving conversation online right now is really raw. It's someone going on a walk and recording an Instagram reel, and it's getting, asking a provoking question. And the ones that are more produced or overproduced, I feel like they kind of fall flat. And I think that that's just because we're in a world of, you can go to Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime and see all of this incredible multi-million-dollar produced content. And so I think when people are really trying to connect with you online, they want to see the real you. They want that vulnerability and that transparency as much as possible. I know we're talking to a lot of ministries that are in very unsecure areas. And so I know that there's lots of caveats with everything that I'm saying, but I do think the more that we can be raw, have excellent content, practical tips, but not in an overproduced way to where people just kind of scroll on by because it looks like another ad or another trailer. So those would be my three things: metrics, persona, and don't worry about being too produced. You actually might get more conversation from your content when you're more raw and vulnerable in your production of your content. So curious to hear y'all's thoughts. Agree or disagree?
John, any thoughts on these? I have a few things, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah. Well, let me start with the last one there. I think authenticity is definitely going to be a really, really important thing. So that's why local footage or a local picture, local language, everything is so critical on being able to have content that resonates with people. And I mean, there's even things now with some of the video editing software where you can add shake back into your camera footage and stuff to make it look more raw or natural, whatever. But even then, I think people can tell when things are super polished and you always have the light just right or whatever. I mean, audio is really important. Get your audio down. But the other stuff, I mean, the phones that we carry around are so powerful to be able to do that. So I totally agree. And then the thing is, I see ministry spending months to create some sort of content that has a shelf life of 15 minutes. So we have to learn to iterate and get things out there and test. And so even though I'd say then my view on the other two is like, I heavily think the data can drive what we're doing to look at it. And that even what a mistake that I've seen on the persona side is that people spend so long trying to figure out this one little persona. And then they put out content. I mean, we did this for a client in a certain country and nobody responded to it, but a ton of other people did. And so it depends on, like you said, if you're trying to reach young women and that's who your ministry's for, then yeah, nail it. But if you're like a church or somebody else going, no, we're trying to reach everybody right in this area, then do a piece of content that allows the algorithms to show you who is responding and seeking. And so you can start broad and general, but you then iterate, use the science and the art, like you brought up, Holly, to be able to continue to bring in new things to that content or in response to how people are doing that. And so I like to get something general at first and then start building a persona, not only of who is our target audience, but how and what are they responding to, and being able to iterate from that and move quickly. And I think that comes back to your point on the content. Like, we've got to be able to go faster on that, which means make it real, make it authentic, make it local, all of those things. Nachi, what were your thoughts?
I just wanted to add on to what Holly said with respect to experimentation. Just experiment, just get out there and do something that you've never done before, because you're going to be surprised at what's going to work. And that's why I like your first point, because that is the thread that actually pulls us into this line, because it's metrics. Because if you constantly look at the right metric and then you know that that is going off, then you know that your content needs to change. So I think when we talk about content and conversation, I think looking at the right metric is absolutely crucial, because that is a key indeed. It's almost like the needles in the car dashboard telling you, hey, you got to be changing something, because generally in ministries, once we start creating content, what we have seen, all you guys also have seen, is once you know something is working, you slowly sit back and just let it run, and you just keep doing it again and again, because you know that it works. But I also want to encourage our audience today. Maybe this is working. Let's say whatever you're creating is bringing you, say, 50,000 views. Maybe something else would get you 500,000 views. Just because, like Holly mentioned, just because you're not experimenting with a new model, you don't even know what you don't know. You don't even know the new audience or the new segment of audience that you've never reached before. So I just feel strongly in my heart that all of you listening to us need to have this heart of experimenting with new methods, new models, non-produced content, like Holly mentioned, and so on. Yeah.
Well, and Nachi, one thing that you just said that sparked something for me was, I think when we say, okay, we're trying to drive conversation, what kind of conversation are we trying to drive? Are we measuring success through online conversation, or are we trying to drive people to in-person conversations? Neither are right or wrong. They're both great goals. But I think it's important to the metrics point that you just brought up, and kind of seeing our dashboard, like views might not be the metric that allows us to know if we're successful driving conversations. It might be comments or shares. Whereas views might be an important metric if we're trying to drive folks to come visit our church in person, or, meet with someone in the field that we can have a conversation with, right? So I think it's really beginning with the end in mind and going, okay, how will we know what success looks like? That might change once we launch the campaign, but what kind of conversations are we trying to drive? How do we measure that so that we can keep us on track as we're going? So thanks for bringing that up, Nachi.
Yeah. I talk about it being a sidewalk where you have where you are and where you want to get to. Well, it's involving steps, and people want to make the jump, or they want to get to the very end and like, yeah, I want to have 100 people talking to me asking, how can I be saved? Great. Don't we all? But there's processes and steps to that. And you want to make sure you're going in the right direction with the right people to be able to do that. And so even those other metrics can, like you said, they're signposts, they're indications. Like you said, not your car, but I would say in an airplane, our instruments are critical, because when you're in a cloud, you lose all reference. And I think ministries like that too, actually. Sometimes we get into this cloud and we're just so busy that we don't even know which metric's important or whatever. And, they teach you look, where's your horizon on your instruments? What's up, what's down? That's pretty important when you're up in the air. And so, those things can be helpful to be able to help you stay centered, stay on the right path, think steps, not, jumps in through that.
Yeah. I think I've mentioned it before in one of these webinars, but to me, measurement and looking at dashboards is a very spiritual experience as well. So that is when I literally, I can hear God's voice saying, look at this numbers, look at this numbers, look at what, change this, change. It's a very spiritual experience. Thanks for bringing those three very important points: metrics, persona, experimental content. I like to call it experimental content, whether it's produced or not produced, just new content. Right. I absolutely love that idea. Just a quick reminder for you to use the Q&A tab to ask your questions during the webinar. Anytime during the webinar, you can click the Q&A tab to make sure you ask your questions. We want you to share your thoughts. We would love to hear from you. We would love to answer any questions you have, or simply any comments or feedback that you have. We would also love to hear that. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. So thank you so much for that. Now I want to go to John, and really, John, I want to dig into your experience. I know you as a company, as a consultant, as an agency, you've done a ton of work, and especially in regions where people are listening to us, in sensitive areas, in areas where there are lots of restrictions and challenges. And now that we understood some of the gaps, the three big gaps from Holly, I want to go into this segment where I'd love for you to talk to us about what works. What do you see work in based on
Yep.
what you guys do. Just run us through case studies. Take it however you want to take it, but just give us some practical things that we need to look for as ministries. What can we start doing today so that our content leads to conversations?
Awesome. So I've got maybe 9, and I'm going to go fast. These are not all case studies. These are going to be some, I hope, really practical things people can do right away. And so, Holly, you are in the Houston area, right? So what's the temperature going to be like today there?
Oh gosh. Well, you know what? I think we're supposed to have a cool day today. Let me look it up. Today's high is 99. That's
99.
so
Okay.
cool.
And so my follow-up question, were you thinking about the temperature before I asked you that question?
No.
No. So questions lead people to comment or to send messages, right? I can't make somebody think something, but I can make them think about something. And that's by using questions. And the number one question that I ask all the time around the world to get private messages is, how can we pray for you? And it is literally just a picture. I mean, I could launch, if the language is right and we have the follow-up network and all the tools set up, we could launch within an hour a brand new campaign for a brand new client, church, team, whatever, in a new country. And we're asking people, how can we pray for you? And we've done this, I'd say 40 or 50 countries now that we've done this in, and the response has been overwhelming. You'll get the negative, but you're going to get the people telling you those authentic things, like Holly was bringing up, those real pain points, those real needs that they have, because you can't ask somebody to pray for you without telling them what it is you want them to pray about. And that drives your follow-up content and iterations. So in one country, one of the largest coalitions we're working in, it's 25 different cities, 4 or 5 different mission orgs all working together in this. I sat in a hotel room building out then the follow-up pieces to the local responders, saying, I know what people are going to say to this question, to these prayer requests. And then they built out content based upon these things. And so when people would send in the prayer requests, not only would we pray for them right there, the locals would, in the local language, but then they would say, Jesus taught about this, or here's something that goes to that. And you might think, well, they're going to ask for prayer for a wife or for a passport or whatever else. But there's a deeper spiritual part that they're actually asking for there. And so what would Jesus say to that thing there? So engaging content that makes or has people that they have to respond to. If we put out a content and go, what are your thoughts? Nobody's going to respond. Like, that just doesn't work. Or tell us what your deepest fear is. Nobody's going to do that. Like, we have to do things that are small incremental steps, but that's one of them. So, you can have images, videos, posts, all sorts of stuff, but that's for us asking questions and then starting where they are and taking them to where they need to go. And I'll share more of that in a little bit, but we've used this all over. I mean, literally probably 500,000 to 1 million private messages that we've seen in a year because of that one question. How can we pray for you? In Jesus' name, by the way. We'll throw that in because that becomes a filter. That just the question itself becomes a filter to some of those private messages. I know some of you listening to this show will think, hey, I'll take any messages, but honestly, at a certain point, you want to filter. And so that's just a way to do that. Another one is to use search from your website to see what people are searching for on your website. So internal search, and use that for what are they looking for? What questions are they? What kind of content are they looking for? And so similar to the one I was just saying there, we already knew what people are asking for. So we developed content, videos, landing pages, all sorts of material that was going to be a follow-up part to those questions that people ask. But your internal search on your website can be a super powerful way to let you know what people are looking for and what things are they valuing, what questions do they have. Another would be, and we do this all the time, we always give people an opportunity to talk to someone, and we always give people a chance to get the word of God. Now, that could be videos, it could be, a physical Bible, it could be an online one or whatever, but offer content to people. Hey, we'd love to chat, and so if they go, I'd love a Bible, great. Well, who are you, or where are you, or how can we get this to you? And that can lead to follow-up messages and questions there. So depending upon what the ministry is, for those of you listening and watching, what could you offer somebody? Put that into it, because that will lead then to a conversation at that point. Testimonials would be another one. They have worked so well. We love telling stories, and we love using testimonials, local language shot locally, like Holly was saying, using just a cell phone or whatever. You can get good, just natural lighting. Make sure you use what I call my foot zoom, so you get closer with your feet or farther away with your phone, and make sure the audio sounds good, but let people share. And if it's in a place where security is a risk, which it is in a lot of places, there are tools and techniques. It'll probably be something that MII will share at some other point, some of those kind of things, but there's some stuff you can do to help protect people. Then that's where that persona comes in, that Holly was saying, because then all of a sudden people are like, wait a minute, I think I know Ahmed here. Wait a minute, I know that coffee shop. His story or her story is my story. And now there's a connection there that happens. So telling stories, testimonials are great. Another one we've done, not in a lot of places, but we've done this, is actually question and answer sessions. And people can send in live questions, and there are people there to answer them. Now, you've got to be really ready for it, and you probably want to filter those things. So it's not a free-for-all that they get the mic and or they're showing up on your screen, the questions that people are asking. But this can be a really great way, especially if you continue to do it, that fosters direct communication and engagement. And it shows that you're really there and prepared, and it lets you be authentic. I did this when I used to be a campus minister at a university one time live, and we had hundreds of college students show up, and they could ask any question in the world. And over, I just kept saying, man, I love your question. I'd love to just go have coffee with you and talk about this. So it allows you to be able to really show you the flavor of your ministry and how you respond, and that you're not angry, that you're not belittling them or the views that they have. And so that could be another one. Here's another one we've done. This has been a few years since I've done this one, but it does lead to messages and comments, and it's doing a contest. And what I mean by it, I don't know if you've ever seen these polls. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. If you can see, I've got some Star Wars stuff even in my office here, but there's all the time on social media these, how well do you know like Star Wars? And it'll ask you 10 questions. And then you're a Padawan. You only got 7 of the 10 right. And so it gives you a thing, and then it gives you the ability to share that. Doing one is how well do you really know the Bible? Oh, well, the Injil's corrupt. Well, how well do you really know it? Or how well do you really know? Do you know these 10 Old Testament stories or the person that's from them? And so you can do a contest or a giveaway or whatever, but people share their results. And there's also just you're kind of poking in a bit here where you're saying, well, people will read this and go, well, I know it. I know the Injil. I know the Bible, whatever. Do you? Take this poll, take this quiz. And now there's ways for them right in there to be able to engage with you. You can build out on your website, social media, a lot of different ways. Same thing with another one would be polls. Depending on what social media stack you use, there's ways to ask questions and surveys and polls. Niles does this a lot. I see this on his LinkedIn one. He's always asking questions. Is it this? Is it that? I think it's the one, I know this will come out a few weeks after we recorded this, but he was just asking yesterday, is it niche or niche? Or whatever. And so, he's always asking questions. I think it's brilliant. I think it's a great way. You can just ask questions. What do you think about this? Why would Jesus do this? Why would you think Jesus would do that? And now you get comments. You need to moderate them and make it a safe place. But polls, surveys, those kind of things work well. I would say what we have seen as well with messages is that when you respond promptly, you get more comments back from them. They will message back. They're there, they respond, you better be ready on that. If you sit there and wait 24 hours to respond back to their question, you've lost it. That you've lost the opportunity. So make sure you're doing it when you're ready to respond. There's some ways, depending upon which social media you use, to actually turn your ads off or to pause them or to day part them. Just make sure that if you're putting stuff out there, you're actually ready to answer their questions when they're asking, that's when the iron is hot, when they're ready to go on it. I guess the final one I would say here that we've used is collaboration. And so we'll tag or we'll talk other people. And what we find is that when we start seeing this network of influence and we'll share somebody else's content. And it just opens up this oikos, this relational network. So make your content shareable, put your logo on it, but also don't be afraid to share other people's content or other people's media. Jesus Film, Lumo, lots of other people. In fact, some of the best content in the world we use are just excerpts from the Bible that are video-based ones. And we're not having to spend a ton of time creating them. We're putting them out there, and it leads to comments and conversations. And as a bonus, then at some other point, I'll tell you some of the questions that I've seen, but I'll stop with that. So these are questions that people ask. If we have time, Nachi, I'll share those, but let me stop with that part right there.
I wanted to quickly jump in to remind you to ask your questions. Don't forget that you can use the Q&A tab anytime during the webinar to ask your questions, or simply leave a comment or share your thoughts or add to the conversation, whatever you like to do. We will be answering your questions live during this webinar. So go ahead and ask your questions.
First of all, that was like a masterclass. I loved how practical it was, and you gave such real context for every single one. So thank you, John. I totally agree about the specificity of the question, making sure that it's not like, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think we're inundated and overwhelmed with information and content all the time anyway. And so when it's a really broad question like that, it just takes too much brain energy for someone to respond. And so your advice to have a very specific question, whether it's how can I pray for you or niche versus niche, more of a fun one. It just really allows people to quickly think about it and respond. So that was my favorite one, but those were all so good.
Drawing out an answer or a conversation or a response is absolutely something that you need to work on understanding. Going back to our first conversation, understanding your persona and really knowing their personality. I've been following a few people who the way they ask question, the way they phrase the question is very interesting, John. One of the questions, the way they ask question is instead of saying, what do you think? Or instead of saying, give us your answer, they say, what are your interpretations of this? What are your analysis of this? So when you're dealing with a slightly different kind of audience, this kind of makes them almost feel like they want to look smart by answering that question and giving their analysis. And not just looking smart, people really go out of the way to analyze and give. And I saw those responses for this question with tons of points, bullet points and statistics and all. People go all out when you really are genuinely trying to draw out the response from them. So I think there are many, many interesting ways to do that.
Well, if I could tag just on what you're saying right there, there's a really powerful word that you can use in your questions. In communication theory, it's called fantasy language, but it's not like Dune, Star Wars, whatever. It's the word if. And so asking people the question when they see something from the Bible, if Jesus is the Son of God, what would that mean? If this was true, and what it does is it gets people to start to think about a subject without arguing. Because in many of the places that people watching this video are in, they know how to debate their views. So I don't want to debate with them online or even private messages. I want them to begin to contemplate these deeper spiritual things that are there. So just by using the word if this was true, or if you were there with Jesus, how do you think you would respond? If Jesus said this to you, what would you say? Man, it just sidesteps the arguments and goes straight to the heart and lets the Spirit do what only He can do.
That is so good, John. That's really, really interesting and so powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, one more brings to mind one of the work experiences we had with one area. Because of confidentiality, I can't give the details to our audience, but basically it was a sensitive place, and we were discussing about the types of campaigns that you would run, which campaign would really, get us the most engagement and so on. And we were all, many of us were brainstorming and saying, let's go with this theme and that theme. And, we were talking about, for example, the usual, themes around the Word of God, which is love, faith, let's talk about, stress and loneliness and all of that kind of stuff. And then suddenly somebody from the field came up and said, let's do a campaign on dreams. I said, what? I said, dreams. I said, what do you mean dreams? Then he said, no, and this person, she said, I've worked in that field for over a couple of decades. And one of the things that people sit in a shop, like a coffee shop in that region, and they talk about is one of the things that they always talk about in a heated argument is dreams. And that was fascinating. And we said, oh, let's try it. I loved it. And we all prayed about it. And we thought that's a great idea, even though it was weird and it was hard to get approvals for that content. But we ultimately did. And thankfully, the team behind it supported us with an approval. We went ahead. I'm telling you, John and Holly, I mean, we had one of the biggest engaging campaigns we've ever seen. I mean, wow. People were like, I had a dream yesterday. And, I had, so because in that locality, that is how the spirit was moving. People were waking up with dreams. Hundreds and hundreds of people were having dreams. And the same thing, we ran a campaign on loneliness. And who knew that COVID was going to hit? Who knew that? God knew that. And we said, and literally one of the images that we put out there literally said, are you lonely? Like, talk about that. Just a question mark. So I just wanted to appreciate that point from you, John. I mean, questions, asking the right spirit-led questions, relevant questions. I mean, how relevant was that question? Are you lonely? When people were stuck in their houses for months. Now talk about a question being asked at the right place, at the right time, evoking the right response. People said, yes, I am lonely. What can you tell me? That kind of opens doors for ministry opportunities. So really appreciate that insights. I absolutely loved every single point that you mentioned. I also wanted to touch on the offers and contests, things that triggers people. So just wanted to dive a little bit deeper on that because we also had a little bit of experience of that. It need not be the way it is done in the commercial world, which is like contests and giveaways and things like that. This could be, word-based contest. This could be something to do with people, something to do with the location. What do you think is happening in the region politically? It could be politics. See, there are in the content world, I've seen three big areas that evoke lots of response. One is entertainment, movies, entertainment, music, that kind of thing. The other is politics. And the third is really belief systems, faith and belief systems. So these are the three big things people like to debate about and talk about. I'm not saying you should use this. And if any of you in the audience are in those fields, then you could try it. But at the end of the day, just giving you an idea of what are the areas where you can invoke those kind of responses. Holly, any thoughts on that?
Yes, Nachi, I totally agree with you and your passion around asking spirit-led questions and the right questions. And then those three buckets are a really great way to help form our thinking, because sometimes it can be overwhelming. There's so many questions to ask. How do you know the right one? To your point, John. And so making sure that, okay, how can we make them fall into each of these areas and those belief systems?
Is you can ask a question of a pain point where you're asking them if they want to consider what an answer might be. So your question of, are you lonely, was a poll, and people responded with yes, which then, so there's basic marketing, know, like, trust. They got to know you exist. They got to like what they're seeing before they will trust you to message you. Well, you do these polls, it's top of the funnel, like you're saying, they know, they see these kind of things, are you lonely? If you knew that tomorrow you could not feel as lonely, would you want that? Yes. Tell me more on it. So the saying is that people they don't go out shopping for a mattress. They go shopping for a good night's sleep. So polls can show you what those pain points are. And they can make people begin to go, when they're numb to it, to go all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I do want that. So that's why I love your lonely one. I think that's just because Jesus felt lonely. He understood that we feel lonely. And so it makes them more susceptible to wanting to find the answer. But it also, like you said, it puts the right people in the bucket there. So I like what you're saying with that.
Great. So I want to move on to checklists, which is what I want to talk about. I want to leave our audience with a checklist, a 4-point checklist inside a zone where I'm going to talk about. which will help them understand that, okay, at least I start with these 4-point checklists. Then I know that I'm on my pathway towards creating content that will lead to conversations. So I want to start with that. I would love your thoughts on this from both of you. I would love your insights as we wrap this up. But let me just put this image out there. The image that you see on the screen would be the 3 zones. There are 3 zones when you create content. One is the creation zone, which is got to do with you, the creator of content. So when I say you, it's the individual that's listening to us, or as a ministry, as an organization, you guys creating content. So you are in that zone, creation zone, which is the first circle. The second circle is the consumption zone, which is your audience. So there are these people who are out there that God has called you to reach, and this is your persona. Again, I love the way we tied it up with Holly's opening about persona and metrics and those 3 points. And so this defines your second zone, which is your consumption zone. So your persona is right there. You are right here. And you are in the creation zone and they are in the consumption zone. And when these two come together, as you can see, there is a midpoint where what I call as conversation zone. So for you to get into that midpoint, you as a content creator and they as a content consumer, there needs to be 4 checklists that I want to outline. Again, this is just a starting point. You could elaborate on that, but let me just quickly state that, and then all 3 of us will talk about it. The first checkpoint is A. It's actually A, B, C, D. So it's easier for you to remember. So the first one, A, is attention grabbing content. Make sure the content that you create for ending up with the conversation is attention grabbing. Like we said, whether it's a poll or we've been talking about, it's a question or it's a contest or something that needs to be relevant to your audience, that grabs their attention, that has the right kind of words in it, that gets their attention. See, people always grow up with mindset. Like I told you, why did dreams work in that campaign? Because it's relevant. That's what they talk about. Imagine you go sit in a coffee shop, talk to your friends about dreams, and then you come and open Instagram, and if there's a post about dreams, wouldn't you hit like on it? Absolutely. Because it got your attention, because it is what you are already thinking about. So just dive deeper into the day-to-day lives of your audience and see what is already occupying their attention. Is it the political thing? Are they running into elections? Can you use that as a starting point that leads you into conversation? So as a ministry, you're always thinking, what is a good place? Like that's what Jesus did, didn't he? He just went there and he said, can I have some water? And he started that conversation with a Samaritan woman. And he struck a chord when he asked about her personal life. And he started, talking about things that she was already thinking about. She maybe was already thinking about the different relationship issues she has. And that's where he lands in. So it's important for you to start with that attention grabbing starting point that will help you create that content that will eventually lead you to conversation. So attention at the top of the funnel, that leads you to conversation. B is an important topic. Again, Holly and me, we have talked about this on stage for MI a lot. That's called brand voice. Brand voice is something that we talk about a lot. That's B, it's number 2. B, when you have brand voice clarity, your audience can hear you. It's almost like every time I read that scripture that says, my sheep hear my voice, I think of brand voice. If you define your brand voice, your sheep can hear you. Your audience, your persona can hear you loud and clear. Every time you speak, they will pay attention because you have fine-tuned your brand voice. The words that you use, the sentences that you use. I would never forget when I was in Nigeria. It was my first trip to Nigeria, ministry trip, and I'm sitting there, and there is this speaker on stage, and he's standing there on the stage, and we're all sitting, and he's starting his message. And before he starts his message, he's just making sounds. He's standing there and saying, He's not saying anything, but the entire crowd is laughing. The entire church is laughing and responding to what he was making some words on the stage without words, because that's just a local thing. It's just a local tribal thing of, they speak with just sounds, that's all he did. I will never forget it. We were all like, what's going on. But they were laughing and roaring and having a fantastic time, right? You get what I'm saying? That's brand voice, understanding the tone in which you speak to your audience. And over time, they will love it and they will respond to it. And when you use that in your content, in your social media, that will lead to conversation because they've already started trusting you because they know your voice. They are your sheep. They know your voice and they will respond and have a conversation with you, right? So that's number B. C is care. Care and love. I cannot stress how important for you it is to love your audience. I mean, I know it sounds like a spiritual, kind of statement, but it's absolutely important. You have to care deep about your audience. Just like we were talking about our loneliness campaign. All good campaigns comes out of your deep care and love that you have for your audience. You love them so much that you almost know what you have to tell them exactly. There's just so much love coming out. So just care a lot about your audience. Just don't think of them as people out there who need we're all good people. I know we all love our audience. We all care for our audience. I'm not saying you're not caring. All that I'm saying is, are you caring enough at a deeper level to really get into their heart and really understand the pain points that they go through every day or things that they need to address in their everyday life? If you start thinking like that, then natural content, comes out of you. That's like one of the tips I've heard for the last couple of decades from the top content creators around the world, both, faith-based and business. How do you create good content? Just love and care for your audience. As simple as that. Because the more you love them, the more you care for them, the more that will also show. Earlier, I think John and Holly were also mentioning, when you create that experimental content that Holly mentioned about, it will show on your face. When you really love your audience and when you're serious, they can actually feel it through your microphone, through your camera. They feel your love for them. And guess what? That is going to invoke the response and start that conversation. When they feel your love for them, they want to talk to you. They want to have that conversation with you. That just bridges the gap in a very strong way. That is C. And finally, D is doors, which is why I want to talk about the new channels. D for doors. Let me explain that. So first is A, B, C. Just to recap, A is attention, B is brand voice, C is your care and love. D is the doors for conversation. Now, this is a gap in many ministries. Many ministries want to have conversation, but they don't make their technology, social media, and their infrastructure viable for the conversation. When you ask for a conversation, how are you going to get that conversation? Do you have a software that collects all the conversations from all over the place? Can you, like John mentioned, you need to respond quickly. Are you able to respond quickly? Do you have a software that can ping you the moment somebody, mentions you on Twitter, mentions you on YouTube? They want to have a conversation. After you work that hard to create content, are you ready to finish that last piece by having doors which allow people to send you messages? This is where I want to bring in two technologies two features in technology that are absolutely revolutionizing the way people have conversations. That is WhatsApp broadcast channels and Instagram broadcast channels. All of you use WhatsApp. Most of you use Instagram in whichever part of the world. I know outside the US, there's lots of WhatsApp. In the US, there's a lot of Instagram. That is why Meta, being Meta, is going full flow on both these broadcast channels. So you basically set up a broadcast channel, and this broadcast channel serves as a door for people to communicate with you in a private one-on-one way, and for you to communicate with them in a private one-on-one way. So I'm not going to dive deep into how to set it up and so on, but basically I want you to look up Instagram broadcast channels and WhatsApp broadcast channels, and think of those kind of ways acting as doors for you to start and continue that conversation. So invest in software that will help you do that. Invest in infrastructure that will help you do that. Invest in teams that will help you do that, and workflows and processes that will help you do that. So that is D, because if you don't have the doors, all those responses, people standing outside the door won't be able to come into you. And trust me, I have seen that happen. Many ministries don't even know who they've not responded to. you don't want to be in that place, because on the other side is a real person with a real need, with a real expectation that you as a ministry are actually going to have that conversation with them. And who knows, that conversation may end up in someone like me, who didn't know God, being transformed and completely changed. So those were my 4 checklists: A, B, C, D: attention, brand voice, care, and doors. So guys, what do you think?
Oh my goodness, Nachi, that was so good. I think what you're talking about is really setting up the infrastructure, like setting the foundation to make sure that we can respond. Because what we want is that tons, hundreds and thousands, and maybe even millions of people respond. But if we're not ready for those conversations, then we miss those opportunities. And so the way that you said that, the visual that you presented, and then the ABCD is so clear, and just really make sure that we're thinking about the infrastructure and foundation that we need before we just send our content out into the world. But John, I know you're an expert in this area, in A, B, C, and D. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts and things that you've set up from an infrastructure perspective that have really worked for ministries.
Yeah, I think the system things are extremely important. I think maybe just for a second, take a step even above that to it. There's lots of opportunities and platforms that are out there. So I would really caution those of you who are listening, you don't have to do everything. Just pick one. Get good at that. Pick the one where people are who you're trying to talk to. So like Holly gave the example of a 20-year-old lady. Well, then what are they on? What platform are they using? That's the best one to go. Paul did that. He went to the Areopagus. He went where he knew he could get a hearing. So you don't have to be on everything. And some of these platforms that are really catchy and everybody likes right now are a complete security risk, and I would not recommend them. But there's other ones that are out there that are great, but just pick one. You don't have to do everything. Just pick one when you're starting out to do that. But I actually think this is a huge point, is the back-end systems. There is software that we use. I'm not going to share all. I'll just take it. We use software that allows us to bring in all of the different conversations into one place, and it protects the identity of the people who are responding. And it lets us respond to a YouTube comment or a Telegram message or whatever else. And I hear people say, well, it's expensive. Okay. It is worth every penny you will spend for something like that. Secondly,
it's an investment. That's the difference.
Exactly. Yes. Secondly, I really recommend using software that lets you follow up where people are. And so we've just, same thing as I talk about a sidewalk and the steps, your systems need to work that way as well. And so having this flow, this A, B, C, D, and how each of those pieces build on each other. And if you're missing one of them, the whole thing may fall over. Now people are having to make a jump. So I think it's really good words, easy to remember as well. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And I do think that thinking through your end-to-end strategy is important. So for your ministry, it's not just throwing up an ad or throwing up a piece of content. How the steps, how you're going to iterate, where they are, where you want them to be, and then how do you make sure that they don't fall through the cracks? And so have that thought, your strategy, and your system set up. And then ultimately, though, it's a spiritual thing. Ultimately, it's the Holy Spirit doing what only He can do. But we want to be faithful then for each person. I think that's the last thing I would say, Nachi, is I appreciated earlier when you were talking about metrics and dashboards. I love them as well because every one of those numbers represents a real soul of a real person who Jesus died for. And I don't want to ever lose the power and the impact of one. Jesus cared about the one. Yes, we all talk about movements and this and that, but no, one person matters. And I don't want to take that for lose that person. I don't want to just assume something from it. So I want to take advantage of every opportunity to be good news and to share good news with them.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I can't believe we are getting closer to the end of our conversation. So I want to get to the concluding thoughts from the two of you. But before I do that, I'm going to open up a whole big, what they call as a big box full of a big topic box, let's just call it. And I'm going to touch on it before I get to the concluding thoughts from you, which is AI. We can't have a content conversation without touching on AI. So I know we had an entire webinar on AI, but what are your thoughts on generative AI? I have a few thoughts, but I'll reserve it towards the end. Let me quickly, just a 1 minute. I know it's very hard to talk about AI in 1 minute, but content creation and AI, absolute revolution. So I'm going to talk about a few things, but first, thoughts from you guys. Holly.
Yeah, I'll just share at a high level. I think it is a fantastic resource to get us started. So I use AI, ChatGPT, when I'm stuck or when I feel like maybe I don't have quite the right words, but there's a concept that I'm trying to grasp, or maybe even to draft out the outline of an article. But it's not human. And you can tell that if we're just taking AI content and reposting it on the internet, there's a human disconnect there, even if we can't put our finger on it. Of like, why does this sound like a person? Because it's a robot. And so I think it's a great resource, but I am not the person that's like, it's going to take all our jobs and it's perfect. No, we're still a long way from that. But I think it's a great tool that we can use to help us provoke those conversations. But we got a long way to go before it's perfect.
Yeah, I would say what the input determines your output. So what it's being used, the concept of the software or using artificial intelligence, it's the same thing as VR and MR and all these other kind of things that are happening out there. It's exciting to me. We need to be able to leverage them. Historically in the church, we're way behind on technology. But so we can leverage these things, but the quality of the input specifically to AI determines the output that you're going to get there. And so it can speed up things. It can give you options, but at this certain point, it does not replace people. Could it at some point, input, output, it may get better on it. So I think we really need to be leaning into it. And with content creation, I actually think it's another big area where we can create the art itself. So some of these pieces and stills and cuts and all sorts of stuff, it's being used in video editing. AI is now to determine where the cuts need to go. So it's really revolutionary. I think it's amazing. It's not more powerful than God and His Spirit, but it is a tool. And so it's one that we definitely need to be thinking and trying to utilize the best we can.
Yeah, thanks for your thoughts. Because content creation can be, your content creation process itself can be absolutely simplified, and really it can be enhanced by using AI. I'm a big believer in using any tool to enhance what we are already doing, not to replace what we're doing, but to enhance what we're doing. So all that you heard from us in the last few minutes are the key. Those are the foundations for you to understand your persona and for you to love your audience, for you to do those content pieces, asking the right questions. All that you heard from all of us, those are the foundations. Now, what I would say is, take that foundation, add a layer of AI on top. For example, when you're going to ask a question and you have this phrase for that question saying, what do you think you should be doing? Then you take that phrase, throw it into generative AI tool for example, like ChatGPT or Jasper or all those tools out there. I use a tool called Meg AI. So you put them in there and say, how can you rephrase this question for an audience? So it will start giving you different versions. And suddenly you might find that particular version sounds better than what you already started with. So that is what I would say, whether it's going to be an ad copy or it's going to be a blog or whatever written content that you're going to create, or a script or whatever it is, just first, you do it yourself because it's spirit-led, it's God-led, it's led by your understanding of your persona, led by the understanding of your statistics and your metrics, and then throw a layer of AI on top of that. So that would be my practical inputs for you. So do ask us if you need more inputs about AI-related tools or whatever, and we'll be very happy to share with you. Your entire content creation process can have AI built into it. But the focus here is conversations. So will it lead to conversation or not? That's the key. It's not about creating a cool content, which nobody's going to pay attention to. So that is the absolute important thing. All right. Closing thoughts from you guys. What a great conversation. I absolutely love it. So I'm going to go with John first for the closing thought and then come to Holly.
Yeah, I would say real quick then, one, I appreciate the heart of those of you who took the time to watch this video because you care. Like Nachi was just saying, you have that compassion for people, and just don't give up. It's worth it. Keep trying, keep pressing forward, do whatever you can, because there are people that need to hear the message, and you are there, and you're the right people to share it with them. So just don't give up. Thanks for being a part of this and for just spending some time with us. It's been a joy to be able to do that.
So good. And yeah, I totally agree, John. Thank you for your investment in yourself and your team and your ministry, for taking the time to watch this. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, like you don't know where to start, because there's probably different people watching this, right? Some of you are just getting started. Some of you have been doing this for a long time, and maybe you're burned out or you're tired. Wherever you are, I just want to encourage you to just start. Just take that first step. Don't feel like you have to have it all perfect. Just take that first step, create that new piece of content that you haven't before, ask a really specific question, and then let the Lord do what only he can do and help guide you. So, and Nachi, thank you for having us and for facilitating these important conversations, to you and MII, for just the investment that you're making into the kingdom through these resources.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this. And in from my side, the encouragement that I have, I agree with Holly and John. Many things have changed, but one thing has not changed, and that is people are still wanting to have conversations on social media, and they will probably continue for a very, very long time. The way it is done might change. The algorithms will change. The channels will change. The tactics will change, but people want to continue to express themselves. So whether it is social media or any other media, private media, whatever you're using, television, radio, whatever you're using for your media ministry, just know that people have not stopped responding. They want to respond. They want to engage. They want to have that conversation. They want to talk to those people that care. So basically they're out there, and it's happening, and it's up to us to figure out how to make that happen. That's all. And this webinar, this just a short 1 hour webinar, is actually a part of equipping, and we would love to continue to equip you guys. So that is my closing thought. So John and Holly, I just want to thank you on behalf of MII, on behalf of David and the entire team, for taking your precious time to be with us. Before we actually say bye, how can people reach out to you and connect with you if they want to learn more about Holly, more about John? So Holly, we'll start with you. How do people connect? What's the best way for them to connect with you, Holly?
Yeah, I've got just a simple website, hollytate.com, or you can email me at holly@hollytate.com, and I'd love to connect.
Thanks, Holly. John?
You could go to our website and kavanaughmedia.com. There's ways there to just connect with our whole team of people. If you want to connect with me personally, you can use LinkedIn, would be a great place. It uses my full name, so Jonathan Rawls on there. So I'm on some of those social media platforms some of the times, so that might be a good way to connect up with me.
Thanks, guys. What an incredible conversation. I appreciate both of you. Thanks again for being with us.
Well, thank you, Nachi.